2,500 years ago, the ruler of the world's largest empire stood before the churning waters of the Hellespont and decided the sea itself had offended him. After a sudden storm destroyed his newly built pontoon bridge, Xerxes ordered his soldiers to strike the water with 300 lashes and hurled iron shackles into the waves, commanding the sea to become his slave. Such an extreme decree was the natural action of a man who genuinely believed he was a god on earth. That delusion of absolute control was fed by a dark family inheritance. His father, Darius the Great, had suffered a military defeat to the Greeks at Marathon. Before dying, Darius passed down a singular, burning mandate to his son: reduce the Greek civilization to ash. To fulfill that mandate, Xerxes spent 4 years draining his empire of its resources. The ancient historian Herodotus claimed the Persian army was so massive that the ground trembled beneath their feet, numbering over 2.6 million men. While modern estimates are lower, it remains one of the largest ancient invasion forces ever assembled. Endless columns of Persians, Medes, Indians, and Egyptians stretching as far as the eye could see. Commanding an army of that size required total, unquestioning submission. When a wealthy nobleman named Pythias begged Xerxes to let his eldest son stay behind to care for him in his old age, Xerxes responded with absolute brutality. He ordered the young man to be cut in half and then marched his entire army between the severed remains. Xerxes demanded that reality itself bend to his will. Whether the laws of nature, the love of a father, or the borders of independent nations, everything had to bow. It was an ambition so vast it required a level of control no human being could ever sustain. For a brief moment, it seemed that total control was actually within his grasp. The Persian forces bulldozed through Greek defenses. Though 300 Spartans stalled him at Thermopylae, the delay was only temporary. Soon, Xerxes' men arrived at the gates of Athens, finding the city largely abandoned by its fleeing citizens. The few who remained on the Acropolis, praying for divine protection, were slaughtered. To complete his father's vengeance, Xerxes ordered the holiest site of Greek civilization, the temple dedicated to Athena, to be set ablaze. Smoke choked the sky above the city. Xerxes sat on his throne, high on a hill, watching the flames consume the Greek capital. In his mind, the Great War was won, and the Western world belonged to him. But setting a fire is easy, controlling it is impossible. While the burning of Athens was meant to be the symbol of Persian victory, the flames actually forged a unified Greek resistance. It ignited a chain reaction of vengeance that would eventually burn its way back to his own throne room. The downfall began on the water. The Greek commander Themistocles lured the Persian fleet into the narrow straits of Salamis. Xerxes, expecting a quick victory, ordered his massive navy to block the exits. But in those tight quarters, the bulky Persian ships couldn't maneuver. They rammed into each other, sinking by the hundreds under the precise attacks of the smaller, faster Greek vessels. Look at the geography of this bottleneck. The narrow harbor of Salamis left the overwhelming Persian numbers completely useless. The same sea that Xerxes had ordered his men to whip and chain only months earlier had now swallowed his invincible armada whole. The god king watched his catastrophic defeat from his hillside throne. Terrified that the Greeks would destroy his bridge at the Hellespont and trap him in Europe, Xerxes abandoned his freezing, starving land army and fled back to the safety of Asia Minor. His dreams of global conquest died in the waters of Salamis. Stripped of his aura of invincibility, a humiliated Xerxes retreated deep into his empire. He stopped trying to conquer the outside world and instead turned his obsessive need for control inward, upon the walls of his own palace. Xerxes locked himself away inside Persepolis. This palace was the physical manifestation of his immense ego, featuring halls large enough to hold 10,000 people, all designed to make visitors feel like insignificant ants. Behind these massive stone walls, the mighty emperor deteriorated into a paranoid, predatory tyrant. He became obsessed with his brother Micystes' wife. When she rejected him, he orchestrated a marriage between his own son and Micystes' daughter, Artante, only to then begin an affair with the young bride instead. when Xerxes' fiercely loyal and brutal queen, Amestris, discovered the betrayal, her retaliation was horrifying. Using a royal tradition where the king could deny no request on his birthday, she demanded her sister-in-law be handed over to her. Amestris then had the innocent woman brutally mutilated, an act of cruelty so extreme that even ancient historians hesitated to record the full details. In the aftermath, Mecistees attempted to flee and raise a rebellion to avenge his destroyed family, but Xerxes caught wind of the plot. Rather than establishing justice, the emperor sent his soldiers to slaughter his own brother, permanently staining the palace floors with royal blood. The court was fully poisoned. Every official watched their back. Every shadow hid a dagger. Finally, on a quiet night in 465 BC, the ultimate betrayal occurred. Artabanus, the commander of the emperor's elite auditard and his most trusted advisor, slipped into the royal bedchamber and assassinated Xerxes in his sleep. There was no grand final battle. The man who once commanded millions of soldiers under the open sun, who burned cities and believed himself a deity, died in silence. He was undone entirely by whispers, paranoia, and a blade in the dark. This map of the Persian Empire's borders reveals a steep decline following Xerxes' death. The dagger that killed him also severed the spine of his realm. Over the next 130 years, a series of weak rulers, endless rebellions, and violent court conspiracies slowly rotted the state from the inside out. Waiting on the fringes of that crumbling map was the perfect predator. In 336 BC, a 20-year-old king from Macedonia looked eastward and saw an empire ripe for the taking. His name was Alexander the Great. Alexander tore through the remnants of the Persian military, crushing forces at the Granicus River, routed the Persian emperor Darius III at Issus, and marched straight to the gates of Persepolis. The city fell with barely a fight, its legendary treasury of gold and jewels looted in a matter of days. By seizing Persepolis, Alexander occupied the physical heart of Xerxes' ego. He stood in the very room where the invasion of Greece had been plotted over a century earlier. The conquest culminated in a massive victory feast. The great halls echoed with Greek music and flowing wine as Alexander and his generals celebrated atop the spoils of their bitterest enemy. Deep into the drunken night, a Greek woman named Thais stood up. She reminded Alexander of the blackened ruins of the Parthenon. She pointed out that the very men who burned Athens built the walls around them, demanding that historical debt be paid in full. Fueled by alcohol and an ancient grievance, Alexander picked up a torch. He led a procession through the palace, raised his hand, and ignited the magnificent cedar roofs. The flames quickly consumed the elaborate carvings and brought the monumental columns crashing down. The fire that Xerxes had set in Athens had finally crossed the sea to devour his own home. The empire he tried to violently force upon the world burned down to the foundation, taking his godhood and his legacy with it. The ruins of Persepolis remain in the desert as a monument to the inevitable consequence of hubris. This stone graveyard proves that cruelty and arrogance eventually strike the match of their own destruction.